My sister stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, her eyes blazing with absolute fury as she pointed a finger directly at my chest. "Get your things out of my room right now, or I will make sure Dad cuts you off entirely." She didn't realize that the locks had already been changed, and her days of running this household like a tyrant were officially over. To understand how a simple bedroom dispute turned into an all-out family war, we have to look back at the years of silent torment I endured. Years where I didn't even feel like a human being in my own home. Growing up, sharing a room with my sister wasn't just difficult. It was psychological warfare. She was the older sibling, the golden child who could do absolutely no wrong in the eyes of our mother. Because of that, her bad behavior was constantly enabled, brushed under the rug, or actively excused. The room we shared was supposed to be a safe space for both of us, a place to rest, study, and have privacy, but very quickly it became her personal landfill. Her level of messiness wasn't normal. It was chaotic. It was destructive. The only visible carpet in the entire room was a narrow, suffocating path. A tiny trail that cut between her unmade bed, her overflowing dresser, and the exit door. Everything else was completely buried under layers of dirty laundry, stale food wrappers, and random junk she refused to clean up. If I tried to pick up her clothes, she would scream that I was invading her privacy. If I left them alone, the smell would become unbearable. I was trapped in a room that felt like a biohazard, and my parents refused to intervene. "She's just going through a phase," my mother would always say. Just keep the peace. But keeping the peace meant destroying my own mental health. It wasn't just the mess. It was the absolute lack of respect for boundaries. We shared a car that our parents bought for us to get to school and work. A car that required communication. She would take that car without a single word of warning. I would walk outside, keys in hand, ready to head to a crucial shift at my job, only to find an empty driveway. When I called her, she would laugh it off. I needed to see my friends, just take the bus. Then came the theft. I started noticing money missing from my wallet. Small amounts at first, a $5 bill here, a $10 bill there. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought I was just miscounting my cash. But then, a $50 bill vanished right before my eyes. I had placed it on my nightstand before taking a quick shower. When I came back, it was gone, and my sister was suddenly rushing out the front door to go shopping. When I confronted her, she denied it with a smirk on her face. She knew there was no proof. She knew our parents wouldn't take my side over hers. The gaslighting was constant, and it wore me down to nothing. The nights were the absolute worst part of it all. She had a thriving nightlife, running around with a crowd of toxic friends who stayed out until the early hours of the morning. But she didn't care that I had to wake up at 6 in the morning for school. She would burst into our shared room at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, turning on the bright overhead lights, slamming closet doors, talking loudly on her phone as if she were the only person in the universe. If I groaned and asked her to turn off the light, she would snap at me. "If you don't like it, go sleep somewhere else. This is my room too." And eventually, that is exactly what I did. I stopped fighting. I gave up. The room completely ceased to be mine. I reached a point where I only entered that space for a maximum of 2 minutes a day. Just long enough to quickly grab a clean set of clothes and change. I couldn't study there. I couldn't relax there. I couldn't breathe there. Most nights I ended up dragging a heavy blanket and a pillow down into the dark, cold basement. I would sit on the stairs, shivering, waiting for my dad to finish his nightly television routine. I had to wait for the entire house to fall silent before I could lay down on the hard floor. I sat on that concrete floor and cried out of pure, unadulterated frustration more times than I can count. I felt like an outcast in my own family, a ghost haunting the basement while my sister lived like a queen upstairs. I promised myself that one day things would change. That day arrived 2 years later. My sister packed up her life and moved out of the house into an apartment with her boyfriend. The relief that washed over the household was immediate. The dark cloud had finally lifted. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I didn't waste a single second. The room was finally mine, and because it was the largest bedroom in the entire house, I was determined to transform it into a sanctuary. But she didn't make it easy, even in departure. She had left behind mountains of absolute garbage, broken makeup palettes, stained mattresses, and piles of useless junk she deemed too worthless to carry to her new apartment. She expected me to clean up after her one last time, and I did, but not out of obligation. I did it out of a burning desire to erase every single trace of her existence from that room. I scrubbed the walls until the paint shined. I shampooed the carpets until the stains disappeared. I threw away every single item she abandoned. For 2 glorious years, I lived in absolute bliss. I had a beautiful, clean, quiet space to call my own. My grades improved. My stress levels plummeted. I finally felt like I had a place in this world. But peace never lasts long when you have a toxic sibling. Fast forward to last month. Word traveled through the family pipeline that my sister's relationship had completely imploded. Her boyfriend had kicked her out after catching her in a massive lie. She was broke. She was desperate. And she was moving back into our parents' house. The day before she arrived, a heavy tension filled the air during dinner. I could see my mother nervously shifting in her seat, looking back and forth between my dad and me. Finally, she cleared her throat. "So, your sister is coming back tomorrow," my mother said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, and we were all quietly wondering, since she's going through a very tough time, if you would be willing to give the big bedroom back to her, just to make her feel welcome. I set my fork down slowly. I looked my mother dead in the eyes. "Absolutely not," I said. The tone of my voice left zero room for negotiation. My dad looked down at his plate, remaining completely silent. He knew what I went through in that room. My mother tried to push further. "But she has so much stuff and she's bringing a cat with her. The smaller bedroom down the hall won't fit everything. Then she can sell her stuff," I replied coldly. "I spent years sleeping on the basement floor because of her behavior. I am not moving a single inch out of my room. If she doesn't like the smaller room, she can find an apartment she can actually afford." My mother gasped, but she knew she couldn't force me. I was older now. I was paying rent to help with the household bills. I had earned my place in that room, and I was fully prepared to defend it like a fortress. When my sister arrived the next day, the drama exploded instantly. She marched up the stairs, carrying 2 heavy suitcases, and pushed open my bedroom door without knocking. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw my pristine setup. My desk, my bed, my decorations. "What is your stuff still doing in here?" she demanded, her voice instantly hitting that familiar, annoying screech. "Mom said I was getting my room back." "Mom doesn't own this room. I do," I said, standing up from my desk. "Your room is down the hall. The small one. Enjoy it." The look of pure malice on her face was unforgettable. She slammed my door so hard the frames on the wall rattled. But that was just the beginning of her new campaign to make everyone miserable. She settled into the smaller room down the hall, but she brought a completely untrained, chaotic cat with her. A cat that she completely ignored. She would go out at night, hitting the clubs and bars with her friends, leaving the cat locked in her tiny room. The poor animal would howl, scratch at the door, and wake up the entire household at 3 a.m. When we confronted her about it the next day, she would roll her eyes. "It's just a cat, get over it. I have a life to live." She was trying to reestablish her dominance. She wanted to show me that even if she didn't have the big room, she could still control the atmosphere of the house. She started finding excuses to invade my space again. The main excuse? My room had the absolute best natural lighting and the largest, highest quality mirrors in the entire house. Instead of using the mirror in her own room or the shared bathroom, she would constantly march into my room to do her makeup, fix her hair, and plan her outfits. She wouldn't ask for permission. She would just barge in, track dirt across my clean floor, use my expensive vanity lights, and leave her trash behind. It was clear she was trying to wear me down again. She wanted to push me until I broke and gave her the room just to stop the annoyance. But I wasn't that scared kid who slept in the basement anymore. I had learned the art of patience, and more importantly, I had learned the art of petty revenge. I realized that direct confrontation would only make me look like the bad guy to my mother. If I screamed at her, my mother would defend her. So I had to be smart. I had to create a system of consequences that was completely untraceable. I started studying her routine. She always walked down the hallway in a hyper-focused rush, looking down at her phone, completely oblivious to her surroundings. She was always wearing heavy platform shoes or slippers that didn't offer much protection. That was when the plan formed in my mind. I decided that every single time she made a trip to use my mirrors without permission, she would pay a physical price. A very minor, incredibly annoying price. I started accidentally leaving random, heavy objects in the hallway just outside my bedroom door. I kept it incredibly subtle. A heavy wooden storage crate, a solid metal doorstop, a pair of thick, heavy winter boots weighted down with tools. I placed them perfectly along the path she took. Just far enough out of the shadows to look like an innocent accident, but close enough to the wall that her path was restricted. The first time it happened, I was sitting at my desk. I heard her heavy footsteps marching down the hall, her fingers clicking rapidly on her phone screen. She wasn't looking up. She didn't see the heavy wooden crate. Crack. A loud, sharp gasp echoed through the hallway, followed immediately by a string of furious curses muttered under her breath. She had stubbed her toe directly against the corner of the crate. It was a hard hit, the kind of hit that makes your vision go blurry for a second. I opened my door slowly, looking completely innocent. "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" "I am so sorry. I was just reorganizing my closet and forgot I left that storage box there. My mistake." She glared at me, rubbing her foot, unable to say anything because it looked like a genuine household accident. But she didn't stop coming to my room, and so the trap was reset. The next day, she was rushing down the hall to check her outfit before a big date. She was wearing thin, strappy sandals. This time, it was the solid metal doorstop, strategically placed near the doorframe. Thud. Another sharp intake of breath. Another round of muffled screaming as she clutched her foot in agony. "Why is your junk always in the way?" She yelled through the door. "I'm just trying to clear out some space in my room," I replied cheerfully from inside. "It's a process. Maybe watch where you're walking." This went on for weeks. A beautiful, consistent cycle of absolute pettiness. Every single time she tried to trespass into my space to use my things, her toes paid the price. She began to develop a literal psychological fear of that hallway. I watched her through the crack of my door one afternoon. She was walking down the hall, but she wasn't looking at her phone anymore. She was staring intently at the floor, stepping gingerly, completely paranoid about what obstacle might be waiting for her. Her confidence was shaken. Her feeling of ownership over the house was slowly eroding, one stubbed toe at a time. She started spending less time in my room. She started doing her makeup in her own small space, using her own inferior mirrors, just to avoid the gauntlet of the hallway. But the true climax of our battle didn't happen in the hallway. It happened on a Friday night, when her entitlement reached an absolute breaking point. She had invited a group of her loud, arrogant friends over to the house while our parents were out of town for the weekend. They brought alcohol, they turned up the music, and they completely took over the living room. I stayed in my room, trying to ignore the noise, hoping they would leave for the club soon. But around 11 o'clock, the music suddenly stopped. I heard a chorus of giggles and footsteps coming up the stairs. Before I could lock my door, it flew open. My sister marched in, followed by 3 of her friends. She was showing off. She wanted to prove to her friends that she still ruled this house. "See? I told you this room has the best lighting," she told her friends, completely ignoring me as if I were a piece of furniture. "We can do our touch-ups in here before we go out." One of her friends looked at me nervously. Isn't this your sibling's room? Should we be in here?" My sister waved her hand dismissively. "It doesn't matter. It used to be my room anyway. They're used to it." That was the absolute final straw. The ghost of the basement kid officially woke up, and he was done being polite. I stood up, walked over to the light switch and flipped it down. The room plunged into darkness, save for the faint light coming from the hallway. "Hey, turn that back on!" my sister shrieked. "Get out of my room," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was incredibly steady. It carried a weight that instantly silenced her friends. "Excuse me?" she snapped, trying to save face in front of her crowd. "You don't tell me what to do in my own house. This isn't your house. You crawled back here because you couldn't keep your life together," I said, laying out the brutal truth right in front of her friends. You don't live in this room. You live in the small closet down the hall with a cat you neglect. Now take your friends and get out before I call Mom and tell her exactly who brought alcohol into this house." The friends immediately started backing out of the room, looking incredibly uncomfortable. "Yeah, let's just go use the bathroom mirror," one of them whispered, pulling at my sister's arm. My sister was shaking with rage. The humiliation of being exposed in front of her friends was too much for her ego to handle. That was the moment she uttered the threat. "Get your things out of my room right now, or I will make sure Dad cuts you off entirely." She thought she could still use our parents as a weapon against me. She thought our mother's favoritism would save her. "Go ahead and try," I said, walking past her and slamming the door right in her face. I turned the lock with a sharp, satisfying click. The next morning, the expected storm arrived. I woke up to the sound of my mother screaming my name from the kitchen. I took my time getting dressed, completely unbothered. I knew exactly what was waiting for me. When I walked into the kitchen, my sister was sitting at the table, a tissue in her hand, pretending to cry. My mother was standing over her, looking like a furious mother bear. My dad was sitting at the counter, sipping his coffee, looking exhausted. "How could you be so cruel to your sister?" my mother yelled the moment I stepped into the room. She was humiliated in front of her friends. "She says you screamed at her, insulted her living situation, and threatened her." I walked over to the coffee maker, poured myself a cup, and turned around calmly. "I didn't scream at anyone." I told her to get out of my room. A room that I pay rent for. A room that she invaded with a group of strangers without asking. "It's a family house," my mother argued. "We should share things. Did she share the room when she turned it into a garbage dump?" I asked, my voice rising just enough to command the room. "Did she share when she stole hundreds of dollars from my wallet? Did she share when she forced me to sleep on the basement floor for 2 years because she wanted to stay up partying with the lights on?" My mother stopped, caught off guard by the sudden mention of the past. She tried to deflect. That was years ago. She was younger then. "And she hasn't changed a single bit," I said, pointing a finger at my sister, who quickly hid her fake tears. "She treats everyone in this house like servants. She leaves her cat locked away to scream all night. She invades my privacy because she thinks she owns me. I am done. If she enters my room one more time without my explicit permission, I will stop paying rent to you, Mom. I will move out, take my money with me, and you can figure out how to cover her expenses by yourself." The threat of losing my financial contribution hit my mother like a physical blow. She looked at my dad, hoping he would back her up, but my dad finally set his coffee cup down. He looked at my sister, then at my mother. "The kid is right," he said quietly. "We let her get away with too much before. This is their room now. She needs to respect that. If she can't, she needs to find somewhere else to live." My sister's jaw dropped. Her ultimate weapon, our parents' authority, had just completely shattered. She realized, for the first time in her life, that she was completely on her own. She stood up from the table, stomped down the hallway, and slammed her door. But as she ran down that hall, I noticed something beautiful. She was looking down at the floor, checking for obstacles. The petty revenge had done its job. It had built a wall of boundary defense that no amount of entitlement could break through. Since that morning, she haven't stepped a single foot inside my bedroom. She stays in her small room, keeps her cat quiet, and walks down the hallway with the utmost caution. She still looks at me with pure hatred whenever we pass each other in the house. But she knows the rules now. She knows that every single time she tries to cross my boundaries, there will be a price to pay. And her toes simply can't take any more punishment. The master bedroom remains a clean, quiet sanctuary. A reminder that sometimes the only way to deal with a bully is to outsmart them, outpatience them, and be just a little bit pettier than they are.